Having a good birth rate is essential to the future survival of a nation. If it's too high or too low in a country, it will spell disaster and potentially total collapse for that country. Which brings me to the topic of this video. What is Hyrule's birth rate? Is it good? Is it bad? What are the consequences on this on the future of Hyrule? Stick around and find out, because the answer is certain to surprise you. The first thing you must establish is, what is birth rate? Well, birth rate, or more specifically crude birth rate, is the total number of live births per 1,000 of the population. Typically, within a single year, for example, if a country's birth rate is 35, that means they have 35 live births per 1,000 people in a single year. In order to have a stable and sustainable population, you need a birth rate to fall within a very specific range. This is 21 to 39 births per year. Any lower than that, and your birth rate is too low, which can lead to significant population decline as well as an aging population. This results in labor shortages, economic strain, and a force of closure on schools and other services. On the flip side, if your birth rate is any higher, it can lead to overpopulation, which leads to strains on healthcare, education, food, housing, and can create unemployment. In both these cases, disaster, and in extreme cases, total collapse is spelled out for these nations with too low or too high of a birth rate. This is why you want your country's birth rate in that sweet spot where none of these bad things will occur. Now that birth rate is defined, as well as the dangers of falling out of the optimal birth rate, it's time to calculate Hyrule's birth rate. To do this, I need to divide the number of births in a year by the average population and multiply it by 1,000. Here we already reach our first problem, in that we don't know how many births happened in Hyrule in a year. In either Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, we see kids, and those are the only ones, no new ones are born. And we don't know what year the kids were even born, so is this it? Is calculating the birth rate impossible? Not quite. We know that the events of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom take approximately 7 years apart. Therefore, by finding the amount of kids that are in Tears of the Kingdom, but not Breath of the Wild, we'll find the amount of kids born within those 7 years, and thus the birth rate for those 7 years. Then, dividing that birth rate by 7 will give us the birth rate for the individual years, and thus the crude birth rate. This also means that we'll need to find the population of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom respectively, and average it to find the average population for those 7 years. Since we just mentioned it, let's find the average population of Hyrule within these 7 years. On the website zeldawiki.wiki, we can find a comprehensive list of all the characters in both the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. If we count only the ones who are alive during the events of the game, we'll get the population of Hyrule during that game. Note that I'm not including Koroks because they're spirits, and thus while sentient are not necessarily living people and lacking the way to traditionally reproduce. Additionally, while the mere fact of their aliveness is in question, I'm not including the Sheikah monks either, because they seem to be in a stasis until you meet them, at which point they waste no time in perishing, making them barely living or a meaningful contributor to the population of Hyrule. Having established that, I counted all the characters one by one and total a population of 399 in Breath of the Wild and 555 in Tears of the Kingdom, which, let me say, is a huge increase. A percent increase of 39.10% in fact. Although, I guess it makes sense because the population would go up if you're not chased by killer robots every time you go for a walk. Anyway, I digress. Adding the two populations up and dividing the sum by 2 gives us an average population of 477. Great! Now we just need to find the total number of births. Of the 399 people in Breath of the Wild, 42 of them were children. Of the 555 people in Tears of the Kingdom, 46 of them were children, meaning only 4 kids were born in 7 years. I think you can see where this is gonna go. Anyways, time to finally calculate the birth rate. Dividing 4 by 477 and multiplying it by 1,000, we get approximately 8.39 births per 1,000 people for 7 years. Divide that by 7 and we get approximately 1.2 births per 1,000 people per year. That is insanely low. For reference, South Korea has one of the lowest crude birth rates in the world, and it still has 5.62 births per 1,000 people. This means that Hyrule's birth rate is significantly worse than any country on Earth, not to mention it's way below the target 21 to 39 births per year. Well, now that we know Hyrule's birth rate, what does this mean for the kingdom? Well, Hyrule is certainly not replacing its population even before accounting for deaths. This means that the population will shrink rapidly, leading to all that bad stuff I talked about earlier in the video. Judging by the population growth in tiers of the kingdom, Hyrule seems to be compensating through immigration, but that can only work so long because there's a limited number of immigrants in the world. You can't get everybody to move to your country, and even if you can, you'll eventually run out of people to bring in. The only way to secure Hyrule's future is to massively increase that birth rate, otherwise Ganondorf may not have much of a kingdom to subjugate next time he takes over. Well, in the end, it's not a problem. Have a great day and I'll see you in the next one.